This is a Fox News alert. The fate of President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, now in the hands of a federal judge. Cohen right now awaiting his sentence. Left his apartment a short time ago. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Bill Hemmer. Cohen could be facing years behind bars. Tax evasion, campaign finance violations, lying to Congress. Bob Mueller saying the Cohen sentence should not be the maximum, citing his cooperation on the Russia matter. Federal prosecutors in New York, though, are hammering Cohen, seeking a substantial jail time. We'll see what the judge says, and here's what Alan Dershowitz said just last hour.
You have two prosecutors, the Southern District, urging a long sentence, saying the cooperation wasn't enough to justify a substantial reduction. And then you have the special counsel kind of saying something different. My suspicion is that the judge will kind of split the difference.
Laura Ingle live outside the courthouse, Lower Manhattan. Laura, let's begin with you. Good morning.
Hi, Bill. Well, many people are calling this Michael Cohen's day of reckoning. And the biggest question here this morning is how much prison time will Cohen actually get after pleading guilty to all the charges? You mentioned that he's left his apartment. He's on the move. We're awaiting his arrival here any moment outside of court. President Trump's former personal attorney and so-called fixer could have been facing up to a maximum of 70 years in prison on all 9 charges, 8 counts from the Southern District of New York, including criminal tax evasion, campaign finance violations, which included arranging hush money payments for 2 women who claimed to have had affairs with the president before he took office. As something just this week, President Trump called, quote, a simple private transaction, which he considers a civil matter, not criminal. Cohen is also facing 1 count from special counsel Robert Mueller's office for making false statements to Congress about a Russian real estate deal known as the Moscow Project, which he at first said was not in play during the 2016 campaign, but then later admitted that it was. While Cohen's attorneys have asked the judge in the case for no prison time, and Robert Mueller praised Cohen for cooperating in the Russia probe in his sentencing memorandum, federal prosecutors with the U.S. Attorney's Office are asking for considerable prison time, saying he hasn't cooperated fully with them. And while the government has downgraded the federal recommendations for sentencing, they are still asking between 3.5 years and just over 5 years in prison for Cohen. Now, we're most likely going to see Michael Cohen go home today, and then he will have some time to get his affairs in order before turning himself in. Legal experts say that could be between 30 and 60 days, adding even if he gets a hefty sentence today, he still has some negotiating power left once he goes to prison.
If Cohen is sitting in jail, he may decide, you know what, maybe I should tell them about other things that I didn't tell them about. If he provides that information, then he can get additional credit and get a reduction on his sentence.
And for what it's worth, President Trump has weighed in on all of this over Twitter, tweeting, he lied for this outcome and should, in my opinion, serve a full and complete sentence. We have been told that Cohen is left with his family. We understand that friends are here lined up to be in court today, and we could hear from Cohen himself at the sentencing. Bill.
Thank you, Laura. Laura Ingle there, downtown New York City. Thank you for that.
All right. Meanwhile, that extraordinary scene yesterday in the Oval Office as cameras were rolling, President Trump telling Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that he would take responsibility for a government shutdown if Congress does not provide money for his border wall. Watch.
Last time, Chuck, you shut it down.
No.
And then you opened it up very
times.
quickly.
20 times.
I don't want to do what you did.
20 times
Chuck,
you have called for, I will shut down the government if I don't get my wall. None of us have said.
You want to know something?
You've said it.
Okay, you want to put that on my...
You've said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
Let's call a halt to this. We've come in here as the first branch of government, the Article 1, the legislative branch. We're coming in good faith to negotiate with you about how we can keep the government open.
We're going to keep it open if we have border security. If we don't have border security, Chuck, we're not going to keep it open.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill for us this morning. Mike, what are Democrats saying after seeing that showdown between the president and Democratic leaders?
Sandra, Bill, good morning. Democrats are eager to pin a potential partial government shutdown on President Trump, and some suggest this is a silly fight.
The vast majority of Democrats have voted for significant increases in border security. The fight we're having here is really more over the symbolism of whether we're going to give President Trump $5 billion more for wall funding when he already got about $1.3 billion this year that hasn't been spent yet for border security.
One key House Democrat says the mistake was holding the meeting on camera and allowing it to turn into an episode of Days of Our Lives.
I was a small businessman before I came to Congress. Whenever I did a negotiation or deal with anybody, I never invited cameras into a room. I think we should get behind some closed doors, hash things out, and come up with a plan and move forward.
But it's not entirely clear what would be acceptable to both President Trump and at least some Democrats. Sandra?
Mike, what do Republicans make of the fight at this stage?
Well, some say they are absolutely positively convinced there will be a partial government shutdown right before Christmas.
I don't think President Trump is bluffing, and I don't think Speaker Pelosi is going to give an inch because she wants to be Speaker. And if I've learned anything up here, I hate to say it, but most people in Washington care about their jobs first.
And a Kentucky House Republican is eager to place the blame squarely on the woman who wants to be Speaker again, Nancy Pelosi.
She does not have the votes to be Speaker. And what's happening right now is she and Senator Schumer are prioritizing Nancy Pelosi's political ambitions over national security.
House Republicans are considering putting a $5 billion border security bill on the floor in a show of support for President Trump. Sandra, Bill.
Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill, thank you.
Michael Cohen arrived. You may have seen the split screen a moment ago. U.S. Federal Court, Lower Manhattan. We saw him leave his apartment with his family on Park Avenue about 35 minutes ago, and now we see him entering court, and we'll see what the judge says. Recommendations 4 to 5 years in prison. Alan Dershowitz suggesting maybe a year and a half. And we'll watch together as this proceeds throughout the morning. No shortage of cameras down there outside Federal Courthouse in New York City. I want to bring in America's A-Team now. Brian Brenberg, Executive Vice President, Chair of Business and Finance at the King's College in New York. Brad Blakeman, former Deputy Assistant to President George H.W. Bush. And Robert Wolf, former Economic Advisor to President Obama and a Fox News contributor. George W. Bush, you should have said. And thank you for that card that you gave to Sandra and me earlier today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, very, very nice. Look, we watched this thing in the Oval Office yesterday together. I mean, it was around 12:15 in the afternoon.
And we grabbed some lunch, watched his office.
Holy cow. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. First on Michael Cohen, what's your anticipation?
The truth has always been an issue with Michael Cohen. It's interesting. He's walking into this situation today, and you've got two very different views of what kind of sentence he should get. And I think that speaks to the fact that neither one of the prosecutors involved here really have a good handle on whether Michael Cohen is telling the truth. One says substantial sentence because we don't think he cooperated. The other says no, a very minimal sentence. How can they be that different unless nobody really knows exactly what Michael Cohen is saying and whether or not it's true? That is the fundamental issue with him, and it remains that case even with the sentencing today.
Michael Cohen's crimes are personal to him. They're not in connection with anything that has, in my opinion, liability for the president. Now, let me put on my lawyer hat for a second. Client goes to the lawyer and says, I want you to make a settlement, the same kind of settlements I've made when I was a private citizen. Now he's running for president. He asked Michael Cohen to make a settlement, the same kind of settlements he made before. Cohen makes the settlement. Now, if he thought the settlement was improper or illegal because of Trump's present situation, he should have said to the client, you know what, it's a different time. This may be a violation. I'm not going to do it. The fact is, Michael Cohen did it. And now he admits he did something he knew was illegal. You can't pin that on the client. And I think trying to have guilt by association or guilt for the bad acts of one on another, there's no allegation that the president knew it was illegal. I happen to think it was not illegal. Cohen pled to it. I don't know why he did. But I think it goes too far to have guilt by association saying that the president somehow is liable for the bad acts of a bad lawyer.
Robert?
So I'm going to take it personally and professionally. Personally, you know, when we saw his children around him come out of his house this morning, Cohen, you just feel sad as a father that you're seeing this. So in one respect, I hope they're lenient. On the other respect, when I ran UBS, I depended on my lawyers. Okay, to be the sheriff. There's a hard line in the sand. There is no gray area. It's black and white, and you tell me right from wrong if I think I'm doing something wrong. And he did not do a very good professional job for his clients, and it's coming home to roost. And therefore, he's screwing with the wrong group. The Southern District, okay, they're a take-no-prisoners office. So I am not feeling really that good about where this outcome will be for him.
To your point, though, I mean, Mueller recommended one thing.
Yeah, but Southern District is...
These federal prosecutors threw the book at him.
But everything is gray with Cohen, which comes back to your point about what does it mean for the president? What do you want to believe? Even the prosecutors can't agree on whether he was helpful or not helpful, which means they can't agree on whether he was telling the truth. Are you going to build your case for collusion on somebody who even the prosecutors can't?
But deal with just the optics alone. If he is sentenced to years in prison, what that looks like to have the president's former personal attorney sent to years in prison.
It's unfortunate, but again, in our country, we don't have guilt by association. These crimes, especially in the Southern District, are personal to Cohen. Tax evasion, the taxi cam medallion scams. These are all things he did outside any duties he had with then personal Trump and then professional Trump in running as a politician.
I agree. I agree. White collar crime, is personal to him. This is about what he did.
Okay, let's go back to the Oval Office from yesterday. First of all, the president talking about shutting down the government for that border security wall. Watch.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Well, there's more of that, okay? And if you want more of that, here's another one, okay? This is the more of the back and forth then. Watch.
It doesn't help for me to take a vote in the House where I will win easily with the Republicans. It doesn't help to take that vote because I'm not going to get the vote of the Senate. I need 10 senators. That's the problem.
You have the White House, you have the Senate,
I have the
you
White
have the
House.
House
The
of
White House is done, and the House would give me the vote if I wanted it. But I can't because I need, Nancy, I need 10 votes from Chuck.
That was a sample.
Awesome. It let the American people behind the scenes, seeing how the sausage is now going to be made in Washington or not made. I don't want to eat it. But I'll tell you one thing. President Trump stuck it to them. And Chuck Schumer looked like he was going to the principal's office. His head down, crouched, couldn't even look the president in the eye. Nancy Pelosi is the only one who stood up to the president and didn't win. You're on his turf. You're in the Oval Office. And by the way, as she leaves the Oval Office, what does she do? She goes to the sticks outside the West Wing and makes sexist remarks about the president. What if the president had made sexist remarks about Nancy Pelosi?
Did that happen on camera, or was that?
It must be.
Was that recorded behind closed doors?
Behind closed doors. When she went, it was leaked out. That's right. She had made it to her.
I want to be clear about that.
That's
Apparently,
right.
some of the Democratic members came out and talked about it.
Right. Exactly.
So
but the fact of the matter is, she admitted to saying it. This is what she said about the president. Nothing about substance of the meeting. Had to attack him, his manhood. Ridiculous.
I would respectfully disagree. I was not happy with that moment. It was great reality TV for 10 minutes. That is not what the Oval Office is for. I wish the cameras were not in there. And if that's how they're making deals, then nothing's going to be done for the next 2 years. I don't think a government shutdown is something you talk frivolously about. There is no $5 billion that the president's going to get. So the question is, what's the best next steps? It's highly
George
unlikely.
Just said he will. Sean Duffy just said they will.
And
they said Nancy Pelosi doesn't know where our votes are.
But senators, there were some senators, Republican senators this morning saying, oh my God, it should not be the Republicans talking about a government shutdown.
I don't know, Robert, some people, they like that sort of transparency. They like to see
65% of voters this morning supposedly do not like the idea of a government shutdown.
But that just does not stick over time. I mean, you had the shutdown in early 2018. Democrats got most of the blame for that, probably. They come back in November and win the House. I mean, people don't have a long memory on shutdowns, but they do care about key issues. This is a key issue for the president. He has to go to bat on this, and I don't think he's taking a big risk.
What I think is interesting, Democrats despise that meeting from yesterday, and Republicans are cheering it. Right. Lindsey Graham says, I'm going to stick by the president. This liberal arrogance, I've had enough of it. Take it on, stare it down, see what happens. You've got a calendar that's about to tell us what happens, Brad.
If the president doesn't do this now, before the new Congress comes in, then he's going to be hostage to these people for the next 2 years. He's got to lay the gauntlet down now. Otherwise, they'll own him. Quickly, Brian.
And it's clear that Democrats care much more about shutting down the government than the president does. He just neutralized them on that issue. I think that gives him
we'll see.
I think the jury's out. I don't think going into Christmas a government shutdown is good for anybody.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Right, thank you very much.
Nice to see you.
Meanwhile, this story continues this morning, that deadly terror on the streets of France.
I am confident that the citizens of Strasbourg will never let terrorists take over the beautiful streets, squares, marketplaces, in this city. They belong to the people.
The manhunt continues for the terrorist who opened fire last night on a Christmas market. We'll have the latest on that.
Also, the president making a lot of news on the economy and the market, saying it'd be foolish to raise federal interest rates and saying the U.S. is working on a deal with China as we speak. The money man Charles Payne has a lot to talk about. The deck is stacked for Charles, and he is next, right after this.
France on high alert as police search for a gunman who opened fire on a Christmas market last night in Strasbourg. 2 people were killed, a third left brain dead, more than a dozen injured, and now 5 people have been detained in connection with that attack. But the suspect is still on the run at this hour. Witnesses say he shouted, "God is great" in Arabic as he opened fire. Police identifying him as 29-year-old Sharif Shikat, an ex-con on a watch list of suspected extremist. He was shot in the arm in a gunfight with police, but still escaped. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo telling Fox News Channel earlier it appears no Americans were killed or injured in that attack.
Developing story. Have more on that for you from Europe when it happens here. Meanwhile, back at home, checking a look at the markets right now. Pretty good day so far. About 50 minutes into trading, we're up 349 for the Dow 30. This after a seesaw day from yesterday. We had a range of about 500 points on the same index. Charles Payne, Fox Business Network, cranking up his show at 2 o'clock this afternoon. First, however, he stops here.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, sir. Good morning to you.
Another exciting start to the
If they do some sort of partial government shutdown, how much does that affect?
I don't think it's going to affect the market much at all. You know, if it lasts maybe a month or so, but for a few days, a partial. Sometimes the market's been up on shutdowns, sometimes it's been down on shutdowns. And we had a couple shutdowns early in the year. Didn't do anything to the stock market.
Okay.
Interesting.
All right.
Interest rates is a big question mark.
Yeah.
Do they go up? Do they stay? What happens? The president saying he is putting his feelings out there as far as interest rates, which is sort of unprecedented for a United States president.
I thought you were going to say unprecedented for President Trump. But listen, he is stating a case, right? He's trying to get something done. He is trying to achieve something, not only with our economy, but with this trade fight with China. And he does not want to be put in an awkward position. He doesn't want America to be put in an awkward position. So if you do have tariffs, the last thing you want to do is to raise the cost of things on top of that by the Federal Reserve adjusting rates. So I think what he's trying to say to the Fed is, hey, you know, be cool. You did a lot of rate hikes this year. You did a lot last year. Even admittedly, Jay Powell admitted himself, they're not even sure what the impact of these are going to be for the next 18 years.
But he didn't say that. He said it would be foolish.
Here's what he said. Here it is. Well, on camera here. I think that would be foolish, but what can I say? What can I say? You know, I put a man there, Jay Powell, right? What can I say? If they do that, I'd be disappointed. I think a lot of people would be disappointed. I have to understand we're fighting some trade battles and we're winning, but I need accommodation too.
Ironically, the Federal Reserve used to complain about President Obama all the time. Not as direct, but they all the time say, hey, we're doing all of this stuff with monetary policy. Your fiscal policy has gone the exact opposite way. But be that as it may, the Fed's probably going to raise rates next week. But they won't go, I'm telling you, they're going to put it on pause big time, especially if we keep getting out the inflationary data. We got this morning, the most important inflationary report out this morning, the CPI report, benign inflation. The only thing going up are used car prices.
So perhaps the market's already sort of conceding, okay, interest rates are going to go up. They've been worried about it. We've seen fluctuations in the market. And now Dow's up 350 points.
Right. The market knows next week is done, but they also know, and the Fed has worked pretty hard to let the market know we won't be on automatic, rate hike. We'll make sure the data supports any rate hikes from here on out.
Okay. You want to get the Hogan Gidley?
Sure.
I think it was from earlier today,
Let's
right?
hear
About
from
China
Hogan
trade.
Gidley.
All right, watch.
What I think people do understand is what the president's been telling them honestly and openly since he took office, which is China has been cheating us for quite some time. And the world community knows this. It's just the first time we've had a president stand up to China and say we're showing everybody, exposing everybody to what's actually going on with trade and other issues as it relates to the United States, and we're not going to take it anymore.
I guess you could add that China knows it too.
Well, China knows it, of course. Here's the thing. This morning, we were already heading higher when the Wall Street Journal reported that China willing to make changes in Made in China 2025. That news actually was out yesterday, but the Journal reported it this morning. This is huge. This is absolutely mind-boggling. Now, of course, we all remember Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. especially when it comes to China. But the skeptics out there, I think, are going to be wrong this time. I think China will make some major changes. Doesn't mean they don't want to dominate the world. You just can't steal from the world in broad daylight. President Xi envisions China being the #1 country in the world. To have that sort of preeminence, you can't be stealing from the rest of the world. You can't have unfair trade practices with the rest of the world. If you want your currency to be the currency that every country uses in their transactions and replace the U.S. dollar, you better do a much better job of being a fair, honest trader, and they're not doing that.
Really interesting, as Robert Wolf was just walking off, formerly with President Obama and former chief of UBS, said, I think the economy's a lot better than the market is reflecting. I mean, it's flat for the year now. He says, thinks the economy's, people are feeling pretty good.
Not only just people, but it's the people that hadn't been feeling good for a long time. One of the biggest things missed on Friday with that jobs report was the unemployment rate going down for high school dropouts and for high school graduates at the lowest level since 2000.
That's a great point.
It's amazing. People are working now that had given up on the idea of maybe getting a job.
Thank you, Charles. See you at 2 o'clock.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
If used car prices are going higher, what does that mean?
I'm not sure.
Is that a saying that the smart folks use it?
I don't know. Business? I printed it out. I looked at it and oh, what the hell? 2.4%. Who the hell is buying these used cars?
That's right. It's cable. Thank you, Charles. See you later.
Thanks.
All right, 25 past the hour. Here we go.
It is decision day for Michael Cohen, Trump's former attorney, arriving at U.S. federal court in Lower Manhattan just a short time ago. He will learn today his sentence. Will Cohen's cooperation earn him any leniency?
Also, we talked to Alan Dershowitz. He says that Democratic calls for impeachment do not add up. Here is his comments.
The most they've come up with is a very, very questionable campaign contribution issue. I don't think we're in impeachment land.
Former Chief U.S. Attorney Andy McCarthy is live in studio to address all of this. He'll make sense of it when we come back next.
Well, Michael Cohen arriving at court just a few moments ago. His sentencing hearing starts at the top of the next hour. President Trump's former personal attorney could be facing some serious jail time. We'll see a federal judge deciding his fate today, taking into consideration his cooperation with the special counsel Robert Mueller. Cohen entered guilty pleas in 2 separate cases, you'll remember, one brought by Mueller, the other pursued by federal prosecutors in New York.
Want to bring in our headliner now, Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, Fox News contributor with us in studio. Nice to see you, sir. Got a lot of notes for you, my friend.
Good to see you, too.
Good morning to you. Take us through it step by step. This is Law 101. What do you expect coming up in 30 minutes?
Well, usually what I would expect is that the judge will give roughly the sentence that the prosecutors have recommended, which the defense isn't fighting that hard, and that is about 42 months, which is less than what Cohen's sentencing guidelines would have been for the array of especially fraud charges that he pled guilty to, but is a recognition of his cooperation, limited as it was with the Mueller investigation. So the Southern District said normally 51 to 61 months. We're not going to make a motion for him as if he were a full cooperator, which would require global cooperation on his part. Everything that he possibly knows about himself and anyone else. He wasn't willing to do that, but they did want to give him credit for what he gave to Mueller, so he gets a shave of
here's what the AP writes. They say he dodged $1.4 million in taxes. Right. It's a big deal. Right. Pled guilty in August. Pled to cooperate with Special Counsel Bob Mueller's investigation. Right. Mueller apparently is looking on him favorably from what we read or what we understand. And then they say he changed his party registration from Republican to Democrat. I'm not quite sure why that is relevant. But when you're said to be a cooperating witness, and then the prosecutors say your cooperation has ended.
Right.
What does that mean? What is Cohen? What is he led to understand when he says, "I'll give you this, and I'll give you that, if you give me X, Y, or
let me break it down 2 ways, because the timing that you raise is important. Ordinarily, if a prosecutor had plans for a big case that was upcoming, the last thing you would do is let a cooperator get sentenced. What you want is the cooperator to testify first at the big trial and then sentence, because the testimony is going to be the most important part of the cooperation. That obviously didn't happen here. It hasn't happened really with any of Mueller's cooperators, which leads you to think he doesn't have anything very big coming down the pike, because you wouldn't let these guys get sentenced first. You'd make them testify first. In the Southern District of New York, which is my old office, which is the office that's prosecuting Cohen, to be what's known as a term of art in the district as a cooperator, as opposed to somebody who just gives the prosecution a little bit of information but won't tell them everything. To be a cooperator, you have to agree to tell the government everything. Everything you've ever done, from cradle to wherever you are.
So at some point, they've concluded that Cohen's hiding something.
He basically told them he wasn't interested in being a full-scale cooperator. They say the Southern District says that outright.
But what we can't say is whether or not he's keeping information from them that would implicate him or someone else.
Bill, the suggestion in the sentencing memo is it's about himself that he doesn't want to speak. He doesn't want to go through his entire history with
not another party.
So based on the sentencing,
it doesn't sound like it's the president, and they know an awful lot about the president. Be difficult to think of
to take
area
this more broadly, since the sentencing's about to happen possibly in this next hour.
Right.
What conclusions will we be able to draw about implications based on the sentencing?
I don't think Sandra, I don't think you get anything more from the sentence that the judge imposes than what we've gotten from the sentencing memoranda that were submitted, particularly by the prosecutors, because that's really our window into where their investigation is going and how they evaluate Cohen as a cooperator. The sentence that the judge imposes is going to be a measure not just of what he thinks of those investigations and Cohen's value to them and what he thinks of Cohen's crimes, but anything on the positive side of the ledger that there is about Cohen that comes from, his family, his friends, people who would speak up in his behalf.
I just want to, this is what the president said on Cohen with regard to this Reuters interview. Number one, it wasn't a campaign contribution, he said. If it were, it's only civil, and even if it's only civil, there was no violation based on what we did. And to add a fourth little tranche to it, Michael Cohen is a lawyer. He's supposed to know what to do. That's what you rely on people for. That's what you pay lawyers for.
Yeah, I think that two things are going on. One is the Southern District is trying to make a case on the president as far as the campaign finance violation is concerned. They would not have elicited from Cohen that he was directed by the president if that were not the objective. But I think the president is right. I don't think this is a campaign finance violation. And what I would say is turn it around. Suppose the president said, yeah, I think that's a campaign it's a campaign expense, these payoffs to these women. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take campaign funds and I'm going to pay hush money to these women. I think if he had done that, which is the assumption of the Southern District, right, is that this is campaign matter. I think if he had done that, the same people who were screaming, felony, you didn't disclose under the campaign finance laws, would be saying, felony, you diverted campaign funds to personal expenses. So they get them coming or going.
That scenario.
And you don't want, your criminal law should be clear law that everybody knows exactly what it is that they're obligated to do, exactly what is illegal. You don't have the criminal law intrude in a regulatory type situation where they can get you coming or going.
Okay, now we want to get to Flynn too, right, Sandra?
Yes, and the Fox headline here, if we want to throw it up, Flynn says FBI pushed him not to have lawyer present during interview. We continue to learn a lot more about Michael Flynn. I know you have some strong feelings on where this
Sandra,
goes.
I think this is the biggest feint of all time. I really do, and I can't believe that it's that people aren't screaming about this. General Flynn is going to get a no jail sentence. If Mueller had said nothing, right, General Flynn was going to get a no jail sentence. He committed a process crime which has sentencing guidelines of 0 to 6 months, but he's a first offender, and on the positive side of the ledger, he's got a 30-year history of courageous, decorated service to the United States. There's not a federal judge in America that was going to put him in jail. So what does Mueller do? Mueller files a cooperation motion saying he's provided substantial assistance to our investigation. And what's the result? Mueller asks for what the judge is going to do anyway. And then when the judge walks Flynn, as everybody knows or should know that he's going to walk him, what will be reported is that he was given a no jail sentence because of the great cooperation that he gave to Mueller's investigation. And then everybody will look again at the sentencing memo. I think it's 7 pages, and it's blacked out. You have like 2 or 3 pages.
You're saying Mueller's doing a head fake for the court or for the public or for both?
What I'm saying is I think there's no there, but they've orchestrated it in a way that makes it look like there's explosive cooperation in there. And it's fortified by the fact that you have these black line pages in the sentencing memo, which makes everybody think, who knows what's under there? Must be some explosive stuff.
Why would he do that?
In order to generate the idea that the investigation is still making progress.
To make it look like Michael Flynn heavily cooperated and that there's bombshells there. And you're suggesting with all the redactions it leads all of us to believe that.
What I'm saying is if it was explosive cooperation, Flynn would not have pled guilty to false statements. He would have pled guilty to an espionage conspiracy, and he wouldn't be being sentenced today. He'd be being held back to testify in some big proceeding, but they don't have it.
These waters run deep. It's nice to have you.
Good to see you.
Andy McCarthy here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Andy.
20 minutes away on that here in New York.
The Russian student accused of being a spy in the U.S. will plead guilty to conspiracy. 30-year-old Maria Butina has reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors in exchange for her cooperation with ongoing investigations. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harris joins us now live from Washington with the latest details on this. Catherine, good morning.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Good morning. According to legal records review by Fox News, prosecutors allege Butina targeted a gun rights organization. Sources say that's the National Rifle Association, along with an unidentified American. It reads in part, quote, Butina sought to establish unofficial lines of communications with Americans having power and influence over U.S. politics for the benefits of the Russian Federation. Prosecutors allege the 30-year-old set up a trip to Moscow and so-called friendship dinners with those she believed, quote, would have the ear of the next U.S. presidential administration. The Russian president said late yesterday that his spy chiefs know nothing about Butina, and a Kremlin aide reported Butina's father said she would never admit to crimes she did not commit. Butina's lawyer unsuccessfully argued that she is a foreign student interested in American politics and better U.S.-Russia relations. The Butina case, it's important to note, is separate from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Sandra.
All right, Catherine Harris, and the latest on that. Thank you.
20 minutes before the hour, I got an alert here. Mike Pompeo here in New York making remarks at the UN now with regard to Iran. So we're going to follow that for headlines. Stay tuned for more on that. Coming up live here in New York City, Mike Pompeo was here on Fox a bit earlier today. Had a lot to say, too. So back on that story. In the meantime, this is breaking on Capitol Hill, Sandra.
CIA Director Gina Haspel going to Congress, and the issue is significant. The entire House is being briefed on the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. This, of course, the big question, how this could impact the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. Indiana Senator Todd Young is one of the major players in this debate. He is going to join us live next. But first, here's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
I've spoken to the King Salman. I've spoken to the Crown Prince a number of times since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and it is absolutely America's intent to hold everyone accountable who was responsible for this.